Hello everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today to our ConnecTALKS Africa panel. It's really great to see so many of you logged on, and I may say both old friends and new. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome to ConnecTALKS, which is a series of sessions organized by Connections, the international private community for trusted decision makers in high-end travel all over the world. We basically help industry leaders from all corners of the globe meet and do business through memorable experiences that lead to long-lasting business relationships. Across our online community and calendar of event, Connections offers a year-round program which promotes brands, networking, learning, and recognition. So everything that we do is highly targeted, time efficient, meaningful, stimulating, but most importantly, fun. So we call ourselves the next generation of doing business. So as some of you may know, we built our new online community in the midst of this pandemic. And this was done in an effort to play our part in supporting the travel industry on the road to recovery and resurgence. So across our network, we wanted to bring together trusted decision makers to connect, share, learn, and collaborate with each other. And as part of our online program, we have been running a series of ConnecTALKS. In fact, today is our 16th session since the lockdown. And with each one touching upon a different topic pertinent to our community. So I'm delighted that today, we will be hosting ConnecTALKS Africa, Spotlight on Luxury Travel, with Mears of Atta, Siobhan Byrne-Learat of Adams & Butler, Luke Brown of Vayeni, and Shaun Mousley of Nomadic Africa. So thank you all of our distinguished panelists for spending the time with us today. But before I begin, I wanted to briefly share a little bit about them. And I'll start with Chris. Mears is the Chief Executive Officer of Atta, the African Travel and Tourism Association, a partner to the industry promoting quality tourism to Africa. With 18 years experience in travel and tourism industry and a strong background in sales, marketing and business development and project management, Chris has an impressive proven track record of operating well-run, profitable companies and meeting demanding financial objectives. Siobhan Byrne-Learat is the president of Adams & Butler, who offer privileged access to private places coupled with unusual service and accommodation in luxury for vacations, family celebrations, weddings, honeymoons, and incentives. Although she's particularly knowledgeable about Ireland, Britain, and Africa, Siobhan has recently set up a worldwide private luxury travel label for our discerning globe-trotting clients. Adams & Butler have recently been voted Best Travel Advisor Professional at the Irish Travel Trade Awards 2020. So congratulations are in order for Siobhan and her team. Luke Brown is the co-owner at Vayeni, who are experts of extraordinary safari journeys in Africa. Together with his wife, Suzanne, they set out to create a truly extraordinary safari company in Africa. Extremely proud of his roots in Zimbabwe in Africa, a country which he deeply believes is vastly rich and beautiful, whose people and wildlife are inextricably bound with its source and soulful energy. They truly live by their intention of creating escapes for the soul, something they adhere to with immense passion. And last but by no means least, Shaun Mousley. He's the owner and director of Nomadic Africa, who specializes in creating the ultimate travel itineraries throughout Africa, each one tailor-made to suit their clients. They are proudly partnered with the original Kerr and Downey safaris, through whom they offer luxury mobile safaris. So from studying hotel management, working several years in the industry, Shaun has gained experience in all areas, from the management side to the marketing and private guiding side. Shaun is also a photographer who has taught photography and has also guided along the way. So we hope that in this thoughtful session, you'll gain new insights and perspective for your business. And thank you, my friends, again, for being here, panelists, for joining us on this panel, and everyone else for joining us from wherever you are in the world. Before we start, though, I'd like to let you know how it works and what to expect. So, for the next 45 minutes to an hour, I will be asking panelists a series of questions, at the end of which you will also have a chance for your questions, but also you have an unusual ability to actually join a social with us all here at the end of this. You don't have to, it's not obligatory, but if you would like to, the panels have agreed to stay on, and we'll create some mini groups and breakout rooms for you to have a little social as well. I'm sure many of you will have used Zoom before, but if not, I encourage everyone to have your cameras on. It helps promote interaction, and it also makes it a little bit more fun. I also ask everyone to please place themselves on mute and to ask questions at any time. You can use the chat button, which appears at the bottom of your screen if you hover over with your mouse. If you do choose to use the chat button, you have the choice to share a question and comments with just the host. Or, Hayley, you are not on mute. Or you can share a question or comment with everyone else. It's entirely up to you. However, I suggest you field questions to either myself or my team, as the panelists might not see your question as they're really engaged in speaking and interacting with one another. So let me introduce the team members. We've got David Benitez. I don't know, Greg, if you can spotlight him for everyone to see how David looks like. Thank you, Greg. Great. So this is David Benitez.
Hello.
We've also got Gemma Fitchett, who is also there. We've got Alex Roca, and then we've got Gregory. There is Alex. And then we've got Greg Reeves. I don't know if you can spotlight yourself, Greg. Can you do that?
I'm not sure, but I'm here. Hi.
There you go. Hello. Thank you for doing that, Greg. That wasn't planned, but very, very well done. So they will be a hand. You can direct them any questions that you don't want everyone else to see. But I do encourage you to ask as many questions as possible, and we will be able to ask as many questions as well throughout, hopefully, this session. So as I said, it'll last 45 minutes to an hour. It is being recorded. So if you have anyone or your colleagues who say, actually, so-and-so didn't know about this, but they might find it useful, you can always forward it to them. Finally, do please be respectful and understanding of one another. We do encourage you to have a positive and supporting spirit, especially in these challenging times. Between us all, there is so much knowledge and wealth of insights and advice that can be shared and help us guide us through these uncertain times. So please, let's use each other for the good of our industry. So thank you everyone again. And now let's begin. So Chris, I'll start off with you. Please, can you begin by giving our audience and us a little bit of an overview about the current situation across Africa?
Sure. Thank you, Micaela, and thank you for the fantastic introduction. It's great to be part of this panel. It's great to be part of Connections. And hopefully we'll be able to forge a very strong relationship with Atta and Connections over the coming years to help promote African tourism. So from an African perspective, I'll focus mostly on East and Southern Africa, which is where we have the vast majority of our members. And essentially, international tourism is locked down. The majority of borders throughout East and Southern Africa are closed to international tourists, with one sort of notable exception, Tanzania. Tanzania is pretty much open for business. However, there are still challenges in terms of getting there, in terms of flight access, government travel restrictions from the various source markets. But overall, the continent currently is, with regret to say this, is essentially closed for business because the borders are closed. However, there are some green shoots appearing. Rwanda the other day announced that they are doing a gradual opening of business. We've got charter flights are allowed to enter into Rwanda again, which is great news. And other countries across the continent are beginning to very slowly open up for domestic tourism. So there are some glimmers of hope there. And we're very hopeful that Africa as a destination meets the requirements for space, distance, social distancing, fresh air, light. So in terms of a destination in recovery from COVID, the continent should be a good one.
Any dates of reopenings and any milestones for us to look forward to in terms of Africa, or that's it?
The latest date that I heard was yesterday from Namibia. They were indicating they're aiming towards the 18th of September for opening for international tourism. South Africa is similarly aiming towards a September date for getting the ball rolling again. So we're very hopeful that the whole of Southern Africa can sort of coordinate where things are going at the same time, because it's vitally important that South Africa opens and allows for connectivity of international tourists through Joburg especially, because that allows people to get into the rest of Southern Africa. But few places are really committing to a firm date at this stage.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you, Chris. I've just noticed also Julian Asher is on the call, and he's also expert on Africa. So welcome, Julian. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to your questions later, or ask along on the chat any questions as well. Siobhan, given your work with Adams and Butler, what is the current situation from an agent's perspective with the end user in mind?
Well, our clients have always wanted to be those that they not only see and do when they travel, but they also feel and engage. So Africa will be very much one of the destinations that they're very much interested in. And our businesses, we're sort of on both sides. We do B2B, we sell to travel agents, but we also sell to the end consumer. So we find that, like everyone is talking about whether a country is open for business, etc., which is important. But basically what clients want at the moment, be they the end client or the travel advisor, they want to be reassured, they want you to rebuild that confidence, and they want trust in what you're doing and what you can offer. So we find there's three things they're worried about. One is about the borders being open. That's very important. And the worst thing, like even ourselves, is that, like, I even asked one of the panelists today regarding Tanzania, because in theory it's open, it's not open. Botswana opened, closed again for a few days later. So there's no information out there even for the industry to get. Can you imagine how confused the consumers are? There was a lot of reports going out that, South Africa would open up in February next year. And even the industry then got together, had a webinar that Atta arranged as well with them, and, informed people that we're trying to push for an opening in September. So, and in Ireland, people were saying we quarantine when we didn't, we self-isolation. So all that confusion is there. So once that's important for them, but even before you get to that stage, what's very important is financially, that they can trust you financially. So like in our case, what we've done is we do 100% credit postponement or 100% transferable, and our cancellation terms have changed, and that's every operator has had to do that. And like the properties are working very closely with all the operators selling Africa, that they're being as flexible as possible. So once we look at that sort of financial aspect, postponement and cancelment, it's also then opening the borders, knowing when they're going to be open, which is changing from day to day. And as I said, now more than ever, someone needs a travel advisor who is more informed than the consumer is, because there's so much information out there that's really misinformation as such. And then you get to the stage that, okay, they're happy giving them money, they know they can travel, the country is open. Are there flights? So that, again, the flights, there's no, you have to have access to a country to get in there. Not everyone, is going to go on private jets. And if they do, it's usually for one part of the trip. And then when they get there, the health, what procedures are in place? Are the hotels, the drivers, the vehicles, all following the guidelines specified by, the World Health Organization and the industry?
It is. Thank you very much, Siobhan. It is definitely the need for information is something that we as Connections have also found the industry needs to know, and we often found ourselves being in the middle, asking suppliers to give us this information and being the conduit to to the agents.
And that's where, like an organization like Atta, you know, the membership really proves its worth to people, because they give us that information. That's where we can go, and we know that what they give us, you know, we can stand over when we're giving it or advising our clients.
Mm. Is this something that you're doing, Chris, in terms of being the conduit, or you're finding yourself in that situation often to actually be the go-to person to know what is the situation in various different regions in Africa?
Yeah, so as the world started going into lockdown back in March, one of the things that we were trying to be very reactive to was informing our members as to what was happening on the ground. Naturally, it was a very fluid situation. Things were changing very quickly. Updates were coming through constantly. So it was vitally important that we were able to share the relevant information. As lockdowns and restrictions and everything start to ease, again, we compiled a document over the last week. This was published to our members yesterday as to what the current restrictions are across the continent. It's by no means a full document at this stage because things are changing all the time. Yeah. But we're fortunate in terms of the way the association is structured. We've got a strong membership. We've got membership across 20-something countries across the continent. And we've got access to a lot of information, and a lot of information from the ground, which is vitally important, especially to the buyers in the various source markets to know what's going on. And all the information that we receive we'll always verify. So we won't publish it unless we've received it from 2 different sources, or at least it's from the Tourism Ministry, from a government source, etc., so that we know that we're not publishing fake news.
Yeah, that's the other big thing as well. Yeah. Another quite topical question that just came in from Tonjezai. I hope I am actually pronouncing your name correctly. He asks, could there be a chance for Africa to open without focusing on South Africa as the travel hub?
Yes, very much so. I mean, over the last few years, Ethiopian Airlines and, well, specifically Ethiopian, but also Kenya Airways have both grown their footprints substantially across the African continent. And Ethiopian have got a fantastic global network as well through their hub in Addis. And they are likely to become the go-to airline for African travel, especially in the immediate post-COVID period. They've been flying and operating continuously through the lockdown, either on a cargo services or on limited passenger services. Currently, they're operating flights, I believe, into Zimbabwe, into Zambia, definitely into Tanzania, both Kilimanjaro, Dar es Salaam and Zanzibar. So in terms of access into the continent, currently the one carrier that you can pretty much rely on to be able to get there. So as restrictions start to ease, I would imagine their frequencies and their networks are going to ramp up pretty quickly.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you guys. Luke, would you support, what do you have to say in support of Chris and Siobhan's have said so far? I ask you this with specific reference for being an owner of a successful business in Africa.
Thanks very much, Micaela. Yeah, no, I agree with everything that's been said by both Chris and Siobhan. Just with reference to the last question that was asked, Ethiopians certainly are trying to be very proactive. They're conducting a lot of repatriation flights. Those are the flights that are coming into Zimbabwe and Zambia at the moment. However, I do think that a lot of the Southern African countries in particular take a lead from South Africa. And there is definitely, you know, a bit of let's wait and see what South Africa does, certainly from a Zimbabwean, I think Namibian, Botswana perspective, probably Mozambique as well. However, as Siobhan was saying, you know, economics come into play, and there's a real need, obviously, you know, for our economies to open up again, particularly from a tourism perspective, A lot of people have been desperately affected by this. And so you may see that as this continues, pressure starts to bear more, and we may not, some of those countries may not actually wait for South Africa. However, I do think there's still a very strong influence. The Tourism Business Council of South Africa are really pushing hard. I note that they are petitioning government to, they've put together a very strong framework for reopening in a phased approach from the 1st of September. Other countries, you know, Namibia have recently published that they're looking at an international tourism revival initiative between the 15th of July and the 15th of August, targeting countries which are low risk for COVID, trying to see if they can get some people coming in. And then, you know, Malawi, for example, is pushing to try and get international flights back in from the 15th of July. So there's all sorts of different approaches going on. And like Siobhan said, you know, Botswana's an interesting one because they had started to open up, and Gaborone had opened their schools, but they had a resurgence in cases last week. And so they have gone back into a strict lockdown. Zambia is open for domestic tourism at the moment. Zimbabwe remains closed for domestic tourism, but we're hopeful that things will open up soon. Yeah, so everybody seems to be taking a different stance. But overall, politically, I think South Africa holds a lot of sway. And yeah, there's just so many cogs and factors involved here that it's tricky to say exactly when things will come right. I mean, like we were chatting with our partners in Tanzania this morning, and you know, they were quite rightly saying that whilst Tanzania is open to business and it's fantastic, travelers there are subject to quarantine measures when they return home. So that, you know, can also put them off. So yeah, anyway, I've diverged a bit, but yeah, I think it's a very fluid and evolving situation that's dependent on so many different factors coming together and coming right. But one thing we're definitely seeing is a lot of you know, positivity on the ground amongst local businesses and suppliers. You know, they've had time to think about this, to think through their strategies, their policies and procedures, and being prepared for when the time comes to welcome international travel back. So there's been a lot of work going on in the background.
Yeah, everyone is working behind the scenes. That's definitely. Thank you very much, Luke. Shaun, what are your clients looking for in this post-COVID world when it comes to Africa? Are you having bookings, and if so, for when, and do you think you'll stay true? Will they go through?
Yeah, I think clients are looking for what most travelers are looking for across the globe, and that's, you know, what the properties, what steps they're taking in order to make the clients feel safe and comfortable while maintaining a high level of cleanliness. Most properties and airlines here in Kenya are already putting together protocols. Some properties have already started to open to domestic travelers. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes, as there are certainly some strict guidelines that have been put in place by the government. In terms of bookings, there are still bookings coming in. I know people have been stuck in isolation or lockdown wherever they are in the world, and they're itching to go out and get out on safari. You know, so I think as soon as things start to open up, then people will start to book. I think there will be some last-minute bookings. There'll certainly be some last-minute deals going on all across Africa. Otherwise, you know, generally throughout, you know, I know throughout Africa and during high season, people are booking about 1 to 2 years. So if trips haven't already postponed from 2019 to 2020, or 2020 trips, sorry, to 2022, then, you know, I mean, sorry, we're already getting trips now for 2022, 2023, booking for the high season slots. But in general, we're quite lucky that there hasn't been too many cancellations. Properties across the board have been, you know, quite lenient in offering postponements. So for the time being, it's still looking positive. People are, yeah, just begging to get out here as soon as it opens up.
Is it normal to book so far in advance, or is this something that COVID has actually aided?
Well, certainly recently people have been booking for 2022, 2023 because they're not sure when things are going to open up. They want to certainly set aside some time to travel. And, you know, people who, when this all started, booked for December or January now are having second thoughts. So just on a safety standpoint, they're booking further ahead. But especially, you know, in terms of the migration here in Kenya and Tanzania, if you want to get a good slot, I mean, a good property during, you know, the 2-3 months that they're crossing the river, then yes, people need to book 2-3 years ahead.
I've been reading quite a lot of various different articles, and they've been talking about poaching and the fact that tourism has managed to keep poachers away. I think this is quite a big thing in Africa. So you guys want tourists back as soon as possible, especially when it comes to conservation. Is that what's your views on that?
Yeah, certainly. You know, there's a lot of conservation through tourism across Africa, and a lot of them, you know, a lot of these organizations really rely on, you know, the conservation fees that go towards the organization. You know, so there is definitely a big drive for this. I'm currently on Lewa Wildlife Conservancy, and I'm just helping with some media footage, film work to go out and send out to the world, you know, for this reason, because really conservation never stops. It's amazing. It's incredible to see how much work is still going on around the clock to protect, conserve the wildlife and these natural habitats. So if tourism doesn't come back in, you know, places like Lewa, you know, they're huge, but I'm thinking about the smaller organizations, you know, across the country, across the continent, that if tourism doesn't resume shortly, then they're going to be in a lot of trouble. Yeah.
Luke, are you finding the same thing, or?
Absolutely. You know, we've recently been involved in some conservation awareness projects here as well, because the area is drastically affected by tourism. I mean, you imagine the billions of dollars that we're pouring in, and suddenly for that tap to be switched off, it's having a devastating effect without a doubt. And there are so many frontline conservation people on the ground that are trying their best, you know, to keep going. But you know, the water's rising, and you know, it's getting difficult for them to breathe, given the situation. And the longer this goes on, the more pressure comes to bear. I mean, just here in Victoria Falls, we've definitely seen, you know, a surge in some poaching activities. Fortunately, I mean, certainly we've got wonderful wildlife still roaming around here. It's not out of control at the moment, but you know, there is obviously the chance that this could become a major problem if there's not an alternative to the tourism dollars that we're supporting so many.
We've got a lot of questions. Thank you, guys. We've got a lot of questions coming in, especially with relation to how do you see the season in 2020. And thank you, Siobhan, for answering it on the go, on the chat. Do you want to say a little bit more about that, Siobhan?
Well, I think that like there's more intensity to travel, that we've all been bottled up. Our clients who, like a lot of our clients would travel 5 or 6 times a year. And the trend is now that they're going to maybe travel 3 times a year, but for longer periods. But they're looking for off the beaten track. They want, like, the things that, you know, wealthy travelers want now is time, space, and reconnection. And it's not only reconnection, you know, with other people, it's reconnection with themselves and also with nature and the land. So I think the more, like, even though I read, like, what I thought was lovely when I heard the webinar from SATSA was that the whole industries come together very closely, probably for the first time ever. And I think a lot of this regrouping of the industry, you know, if we carry it forward and if we all work together as much as we're working now, it'll be fantastic, you know, for the future. But what we're doing is we're concentrating on places like Botswana, we're concentrating on Namibia because of the spatial, you know, ability to distance there, Zambia, you know, South Africa because of the medical care there, like and Rwanda because like already Rwanda have in place that you have to get a test 3 days before you travel, and then you're tested on arrival, and you have to stay 24 hours in Kigali. And for the second test, now Chris will correct me if my information is out of date, but you have to stay for the second test, and once there's 2 negatives, then you're allowed to continue your journey. So, you know, all of these countries are doing their best. Like Zimbabwe was one that I really wanted to push for this year, and the kickback I'm getting from clients is medical care in Zimbabwe. But like Zimbabwe is probably 1/3 of the price of Botswana. You know, you can do a very good safari in Zimbabwe, and there's a wonderful, you know, wildlife there as well. So it's difficult, but like I do believe that, you know, every country that's active in the tourism industry in Africa has something to offer at the moment.
I mean, you touched upon something, you know, medical, you know, how safe are guests when they get in? If you fall unwell and you are in a very remote place, what is the hospital infrastructure? And I don't know who wants to answer this of you guys. Maybe Chris, or even any, you know, Luke or Shaun.
Well, I'll jump in here, and I mean, there's probably the most recognizable medical infrastructure would be down in South Africa. However, across the continent, there are fantastic hospitals, there are fantastic clinics, and there is the right infrastructure in place to be able to, should someone fall ill while on safari, there is the infrastructure in place to get them out of where they are to good quality medical care and attention. And what I'm encouraged in seeing just recently over the last few days is a variety of different insurance companies writing insurance policies which will provide medical benefit for specifically for COVID. So it is encouraging that the tourism industry, the insurance industry is actually reacting in a positive way to provide the cover which will actually enable people to travel with confidence. So there are the processes in place, which is great to see.
But on a conference yesterday that I was on, MedJet were speaking, and they said at the end of the day, if planes are not allowed to land, international flights are not allowed to land, the MedJet planes aren't allowed either to take people out. So, you know, all of that has to be borne in mind. And like everyone is also talking about getting the antivirus, but, you know, I'm not negative. I just want to be pragmatic. You know, it's not the be all and end all. Like we had HIV before, we had SARS, we have Ebola. You know, we're going to have to get used to this. This is the way it's going to be going forward. So we just have to make sure that we all put best practice in place. And maintain whatever we learn to do now, keep it going. Like we've now got used to giving yourself an hour extra go to an airport in order to go through security. It's going to be different. And we all have to be responsible. Like the responsibility doesn't lie with the individual or the country or the industry. It lies with everybody.
And I guess, and that's absolutely it, Siobhan. Guests need to feel safe. And if all the stops are in place in order to ensure that that is the case, then there is no reason why one wouldn't go, obviously, given that the flights can actually land, because one is attached to the other. But on the safety of guests, and that's very linked as well to the subject of rebuilding trust and confidence. So how do you actually rebuild trust and confidence in this new normal? I'm going to ask that to Shaun. Is Shaun there? Not there. Shaun there? Yeah. Ooh, oh, you mute. Oh, sorry, he was on mute. Do you have the baboons? That's why. The baboons arrived to put us on mute. Is that why?
I'm safe now. I'm locked away in the net here. Sorry, I had the technical, you weren't clear there. Could you repeat that, please?
That's fine. No, we were just talking about, safety, medical attention, getting people. How do you rebuild trust and confidence? What safety measures are in place? And how do you rebuild trust and confidence to your clients?
Yeah, and that's really, I guess, going back to, talking about what protocols and procedures the different properties are putting in place. I mean, the risk is coming into the country and, then, getting, say, COVID from a staff member in a lodge or from another traveler. These are things that all the different properties on the circuits are thinking about now, and the governments are thinking about.
Yeah, so it really is something that you need to completely overhaul the way that you operate to give people trust and for people to just book in confidence, really. Luke, what are you doing what new standards across the whole process are you putting in place?
Well, I think, first things first, we need to communicate clearly. And, it's a difficult time for everybody, and not just ourselves here in Africa, but obviously all of our clients across the world. Fortunately, we're at a time on the earth now where technology is quite good and we can be communicating on these sorts of platforms. Here I am in Victoria Falls, sunny day, a little bit chilly, but that things are not desperately dire here. We still have a beautiful country, and we start by reassuring and communicating. But if we to start, I've got a little bit of a list of things that people are doing, and maybe I can take you through those briefly. But in terms of from the aviation standards, and I must give a thanks to Just African Aviation, who've supported me on some of these standards. But excuse me if some of this is information that is already known, but I think it's worth going through it. So what to expect at airports? I think we can be expecting, in Africa, contactless check-ins. Certain airlines, for example, Emirates, going ahead with offering a seamless process with a home check-in and a luggage collection from home that is sanitized. Hand sanitizers widely available throughout the airports. Increased use of self-check passport scanners. Going contactless throughout pretty much. Social distancing with signage. Floor markings restricted in screened areas. Compulsory wearing of masks. Regular temperature checks and heat scanning. Passengers only being allowed into airport buildings, non-passengers having to stay outside. A need for COVID-19 free certificates initially until such time as there is a vaccine to be presented on arrival in destination, conducted within the last 72 hours. COVID testing in some cases on arrival in destination. And in some cases at guest expense. And then a travel history and health declaration form to be filled out on arrival. Possible quarantine measures like Rwanda, for example, they are opening up, as Chris said, for international charters, but there will be a test on arrival and a possible quarantine overnight until such time as the test results come back. And then on board the planes will be loaded at 70%, probably be an increased cost on airline tickets. Luxury sector opportunities will definitely start to arise. Private charters predicted should increase. Commercial airlines, middle seats empty, unless you're with a family, but also I see Safir in South Africa offering an opportunity to buy. So for example, if you're sitting in a row of 3, the middle seat will automatically be empty, but you can, at an extra expense, pay for the 3rd seat to be empty as well. Meals will be pre-packed, and aircrafts obviously sanitized before and after. These are so many things. It's similar on the transfers and activities. Drivers and staff will be wearing masks and gloves. Vehicles will have to be sanitized before and after. You know, there will be on game drives, for example, a maximum of 4 people in a standard game drive vehicle. They'll be using open air vehicles, which is the typical Southern Africa style vehicles. Unless you are in a party, a private party, then you'd have to probably be adhering to some of these rules. And then individually wrapped snacks, not the sort of sharing in bowls and things that we've been used to at sundown at times. Probably serving yourselves as guests more often. And then on the accommodation side, and again, I must pay thanks to some of our suppliers, such as Metetsi and Lamala, and, you know, Tourism Business Council of South Africa, as well as World Health Organization, that have laid out the standard, which many are now following. You know, on arrival at accommodation, people will first have had to have provided pre-check-in information, which was starting to become the norm, but it wasn't the standard. And so now passport details, addresses, next of kin's, dietary requirements will be compulsory to supply up front, so that there is no contact on check-in, health declaration forms. I mean, the list is quite long, but I think it's a case of just trying to get used to that and passing the information clearly through to our agents and clients, so that, you know, this information doesn't catch people unawares, that when they arrive in destination. I think, you know, we've had 4 or 5 months now of COVID-19, so people have become sort of sensitized to the fact that we're into a new world. But it's a case of making that habit, and it's no different, unfortunately, when you'll be coming out on safari, that, you know, these measures will be put in place. A few other things, like there'll be no more communal dining in safari camps. You know, it'll be probably restricted to 2 guests per table unless you're traveling as a group. But the focus will be on more intimate and private spaces. It works very well for our luxury safari sector, to be honest. I think we're well positioned to handle travelers that are looking to come back to Africa, you know, early. They're going to be in probably one of the most COVID risk-free environments by coming out and staying in wide open spaces where social distancing is not going to be tricky to provide. And it's just a few things that are being done in order to make that as safe as possible. But there is quite a long list, and I've covered a few of them, but I won't go into all of it. But definitely there's a lot of preparedness on the part of suppliers on the ground, getting ready and making sure that they are you know, ready for the new normal, and they'll be doing it in the way that they've always done it, with openness, care, a lot of communication, and I think people will feel exceptionally safe. And so we're just, as a business, obviously communicating that information out, and just showing people that, you know, we care and we're ready.
And obviously all of this builds confidence. So thank you very much for this very comprehensive...
Micaela, do you mind if I chip in?
Please.
I think one of the things that I've seen with some of these protocols that are coming out is that, to be honest, the pendulum has swung a bit to the extreme side, and there's so much sanitizing and health and safety and all this stuff that it's scary. And I think that what a lot of people want is they want to know what the effect is going to be on their experience. You know, they want to know, do I have to wear a mask on a game drive or a bushwalk? You know, is it going to really impact my experience? I have some clients who say, if I have to wear a mask, I'm not traveling. You know, if I have to wear a mask on my game drive, I'm not going. And so that's the sort of information that we need, that we're not necessarily getting from a lot of suppliers. A lot of suppliers give me 4 sheets of how we're going to clean the room, but nothing on what's going to happen to the experience. And what clients really care about is to be honest, if they're staying at a top-end lodge, they think that all that stuff should be taken for granted. And what they want is, like, they want to say, okay, how's that going to affect my stay? Am I going to be able to use the pool? you know, when it's hot? Am I going to be able to have a massage? Am I going to be able to, you know, do the things that I would normally want to do on safari? So, I mean, like, I think you need to balance. You definitely need the health and safety stuff, but we also need stuff about the experience, you know, because that's in the end why people go. If they want to stay in a health and safety bubble, they might as well stay at home, you know, and they're obviously willing to accept some risk or they wouldn't get on a plane in the first place. But they're saying, like, you know, what's my experience going to be like? Am I going to have to like smell the African bush through a mask? That's what they really want to know. That's the questions that we're getting.
That's very useful, Julian, and I think that's also very good feedback, because we're all adapting to this new normal, and you know, companies are wanting to hear from you guys, the agents, as to what the clients want. Is this the same thing you're hearing, Siobhan, as well, from your clients?
I'm just bursting to answer this, because I think we all have to use common sense. Like, why do you think you're more at risk on an open vehicle in the bush than you are walking down a street in Dublin? Like, tell me, that's the part I don't get. Like, we have to communicate, like, we all have to be sensible and use common sense, because the thing is that, like, Africa, if you're in the wild, in the bush, you're in one of the safest places possible. If you're in a lodge or a camp that has 4, 6, or 10 bedrooms, it's far safer than being in a, you know, a Four Seasons hotel in Europe that has 100. So, you know, I think we have to reassure, like, a lot of people, when they hear the word Africa, it's always the unknown. Like, you know, even harking back to the term, the dark continent, we have to tell people what Africa is really like. And that's what our role is that we have to allay their concerns. And, you know, like, you know, using a swimming pool in a camp where you might have 10, 12 bedrooms, as opposed to using a swimming pool in a larger hotel, you know, you just have to use common sense. But
I guess what we're not getting from some of the properties is being able to say, at this lodge, this is what the situation is, this is what's open and this is what's not open. And that's what would be super helpful from properties, is to get that kind of data. Just so that, you know, when people ask, we have the answer to the question.
But even with regard to flights, like Chris was just telling me yesterday that Delta are doing a daily flight in October that's doing Atlanta, Johannesburg and Cape Town. The thing is that you haven't seen a spike in flight attendants having the virus. So it shows that the planes aren't as dangerous as we think. I think it might be going through the airports, you know, are more difficult, but like, I'm Kenyan resident and I go to Kenya so many times and my temperature has been taken all along and I've never objected to it. The fact that Kenya is still in lockdown, you're not allowed to move from county to county. These are all things working in our favor, so that when the countries do reopen, it's with us in mind as the traveler traveling there, or the travel advisor who's reassuring the clients. But I think for, you know, like, if I'm on a game drive, I would not be wearing a mask.
I wouldn't either. But the thing is, the client wants to know. They want something that says that that's not the case.
That's what you have to tell them.
Yeah, and that's also the rapport that you have with your supplier as well. So it's kind of keeping that communication open. But it's a good point. It's a very good point, Julian, and thank you for highlighting it. That's definitely, it's a very good point. I wanted to just circle it back to Chris. What destinations do you envisage within Africa improving quickly? Where do you see the success stories lying, and which destinations do you envisage being a bit slower in the recovery? Now, albeit all this, Africa being open to international tourism and to tourism overall, there's been a few comments as well made on domestic, but for now, let's keep it to which are the destinations improving quickly, any success stories, and where do you envisage a slower recovery?
It's a very difficult one to answer. I mean, my gut feeling on what's going to recover quickest are going to be the destinations that are going to be easiest to get to. Because if someone's wanting to travel to a remote destination, so they're wanting the space that Africa can provide, they're not going to want to transit through a multitude of different airports and potentially put themselves at a whole set of different risks. So the destinations that are going to be more easily accessible, potentially with one hop plus then getting onto a private charter or something, or potentially going via a large gateway such as Dubai, for argument's sake. So it is very difficult to say sort of which ones are going to be opening up quicker, which ones are going to recover soonest. at the moment, as I said at the beginning, we're very much a case of pretty much everything is closed from an international perspective at this stage. So it's really once those lockdowns do start easing and the international borders do start opening, and it's also linked in with the various protocols. And I'd just like to come back to the point that Julian was making. I think I'm seeing a lot of the protocols coming through on almost on a daily basis from our members, and they're being distributed across the network. I think that the members and the suppliers on the ground are very much putting protocols in place for elements that they're able to control at this stage. Masks, for example, that's based on government requirements. So currently in certain countries, if you're out in public, you need to wear a mask. That is the government requirement. But they haven't got any tourists yet, so they don't know what the requirements are going to be when the tourists do come. So currently their protocols that are in place are all tied in with things that they're able to control, i.e. the hygiene, the processes, all of that side of things.
That's useful, thank you. Shaun, are you mask on or mask off when you're when you know, in this new normal? I think you're on mute. Hang on a minute. I need to.
Mask on when we need to be. Currently in Kenya, even on the roads, if you've got someone in your car and you come from the same house, you both have to wear a mask in the car, which is just ridiculous for me if you come from the same house. In general, you will see that the mood along the streets, you know, most people in public areas are wearing masks. I've just seen the new protocols for this year for opening up, and it says, yeah, well, guides will need to wear masks, so I'll have to wear masks when I'm guiding my clients. But for clients, I think it's optional. Doesn't specify anything about mess areas. This was brushed on earlier, and think communal dining won't be a thing anymore. Well, it's certainly for the near future. But yeah, for me, in the most part, at the moment, I'm avoiding the mask as much as I can. But, you know, Africa is a place, when you're out here on safari, most of your time is spent out in the wilderness. That's the beauty about it. So that's why I think, you know, a trend will be Africa travel, because you can get away from those public spaces. It's not like going to these beautiful cities around the world. You're out on game drives, you're out on bushwalks, you're in nature, you don't need to worry. It's one of the safest places.
So are you starting to see new trends emerging in terms of what clients are asking for, Shaun?
Yeah, certainly, you know, especially where, you know, in the luxury market, I think there'll be, you know, more people searching more privatized trips, less exposure to mass tourism. And also maybe not wanting to move around as much and be in areas where you might be exposed. So rather than doing a 2-week itinerary in 4 different properties, maybe it's 2 different properties, have a base in one property, maybe extend your time there and then go out to different kind of ecosystems from there. We've certainly been getting more interest on our mobile product and private villas and private charters. So clients, you know, will arrive in the airport, go straight to a private charter, and then out to a private mobile or a private camp, and then onto a villa. And so the whole itinerary, there's no interaction with any other travelers. Clients have also, you know, been asking for better terms and conditions with regards to final payments and cancellations, just because, you know, things are changing so rapidly. People don't want to be left in the dark and, you know, make their final payment and then be told that they can't travel to the country. And lodges are coming to the table with this, you know, final payment within 45 days, say, or cancellation terms are much better. And then, you know, also clients being a little bit more aware of their type of travel. I think after this time, people are a little bit more aware of the environment and maybe traveling to more eco-friendly properties. your high-end, low-impact properties. Maybe an interest more in philanthropic trips and reconnecting with nature.
There's an interesting chat conversation going on in the chat group. They're talking about buffs, wearing buffs and bandanas, saying that they're quite easy to just pull up and pull down. So where you're required to be showing that you've got a mask, then you've got it, but it's easy enough to pull it down. So I guess we're all going to have to adapt to this.
This has one.
Yeah. And you can brand it with your own logos and you can give them out. There you go. Chris has got it. Fantastic. A lot of people loving that. Oh, Luke as well. Fabulous. Right. We want some branded ones now so that you can then send one or two or a few in London and we can promote your brand as well. But Shaun has touched upon an interesting point, which is of pricing. And I remember touching upon it on my previous talk about Asia. We talked about exactly the same thing, which is pricing. So are our client expected to find more bargains and driving the price down? Who wants to answer that?
Maybe I can come in and comment on that one. I think, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I think we definitely, there's definitely going to be more bargains. But I think also we need to be wary of the fact that we can't be having a price war at the same time. I mean, I think it's really important that we avoid that because that's not going to help anybody. But certainly I think there will be more, rather than maybe reducing prices too much, there'll be a lot of flexibility in terms of when you can cancel. I mean, in some cases, suppliers, I mean, I've seen on the extreme end, you're allowed to cancel your trip up to 48 hours prior to travel. So, you know, I mean, that's a really competitive offer from some. And the other thing is you are also able, I think there are some offers going out where you're able to pay a little bit more so that you can cancel late. So, you know, an initial deposit might be a standard 25%, but you might be paying sort of 35, 40%, and then you can cancel early. You know, there's all sorts of creative ways to make this work without everybody losing out. So
very
maybe
tricky, Luke, because if you think about, well, safaris for one, I'm receiving comments and saying, you know, safari is not for bargain. But also it is very tricky because on one side, you suppliers are required to adhere to more strict cleaning, safety measures. So your costs clearly are going to go up. So one would argue, how the hell can I drive the price down? So it is very tricky, especially when it comes to price wars, and you've touched upon that. Siobhan, what's your comment on that?
No, I agree 100%. I think at this time, with how industry has suffered, the people that work in the industry, the amount of people that were laid off, the communities that are affected, that the price definitely should not be discounted. I agree flexibility should be brought in because, I hate to use the word, but it's a new norm. And the other thing I worry about is the cost to the environment. When you see, like, you know, countries like Kenya have taken away the use of, you know, plastic bags, and now they've brought in, again, single-use plastic. But unfortunately, because almost the clients are dictating that they want that single-use plastic again and all that PPE equipment, like, it's really sad for the environment that we're coming back to that. But I also think that safaris will become a luxury item again, like they were always a luxury, but they'll go back to being, you know, the pinnacle of luxury in a sense. And like what we're seeing from trends is takeovers. Like we would have had 5% of inquiries in the past for takeover properties. Now I would say, you know, if it wasn't this week or last week, it would have been 80% of inquiries for taking over a property in its entirety. And the other thing is the private jets, the private helicopters. Like I was speaking to one operator in Peru, and she said in one day last week, she booked more private private small planes and helicopters than she did in the whole of the previous year. So, and then the other thing is, like, you know, post 9/11, you're going to see those family, you know, regatherings that they're, you know, so many of us nowadays live in different countries, different continents, and they'll regather and they'll, you know, they'll do the takeover the property when they regather. So that's the trends that we're seeing. And again, off the beaten track and less moving around as well, that they'll do 2 properties as opposed to 4. But we're finding like some inquiries are longer than they would have been in the past as well. But I'm definitely against discounting. I think, you know, flexibility or add something into the value and the quality of the product, but no discounting.
Yeah, we actually haven't had a single client ask for a discount. All they care about is, you know, what if, particularly if you're an extended family and you're scattered around the world, what if someone can't go, you know, what's our flexibility there? You know, because and people staying like a week at each place rather than 3 or 4 days, and not doing as many countries, because adding extra countries then adds extra complexity. So maybe instead of doing Kenya and Tanzania, they'll either focus on Kenya or focus on Tanzania, just to avoid any potential border crossing issues.
We're also seeing people like choose Qatar instead of going through Abu Dhabi or Dubai, because they think Doha is a smaller airport, and the amount of connections with Qatar in Africa is amazing as well.
Yeah,
so
Qatar's good.
options. Yeah.
Okay, well, I want to stay true to my promise, and it's already been an hour, guys. So what I will do now is I will free all of you to leave if you wish to, but also encourage all of you to actually join us for a little social, because I don't know about you, but I have been really suffering this lockdown. I really miss this human to human interaction, and the only way of being able to have that is virtual at the moment. So if you would like, I will now open the social side of this event open, and I will divide you all into smaller groups where this conversation can continue. You can voice your ideas, but in a more intimate settings. So it has been absolutely wonderful. I actually don't know if all of the panelists can stay on. Are you available, or who was it, Shaun or Luke that Shaun, Luke can, okay. Shaun, are you able to stay and join us? I need to unmute you.
Yes, it's me. I might have to run.
You might have to run. Oh, well, with the exception of potentially Shaun, everyone else. Chris, can you stay? Siobhan, can you stay?
Yeah.
Oh, that would be really nice. So what I'll do now is I will just draw your attention to a couple of things before I break you out into groups. And to tell you that as Connections, we have an amazing lineup of interesting, insightful content to come. This Thursday, we have an Asia-focused social in anticipation for our Connections virtual week in July, which is the 13th to the 17th of July. We will also be hosting 2 webinars to guide all of our members through how the virtual event will work. And this is on Thursday, the 25th and on Friday, the 26th. But in the meantime, I hope all of our members that could connect today are enjoying the Connections Online community. And we've launched just this week the mobile version of the community, because now with lockdown easing and everything, people might actually want to take it from their mobile phone. So I now would like to open it. So if you feel free to go if you have to go, but if you can stay, it would be really nice to have a little social and to get to know each other a bit more. So what I'll do is I will open the breakout rooms. So we now have still a few people ducking out. I will probably open around, I'll open around, so it's 40, 38, 36. Oh, a lot of people ducking out now saying, no, I'm going. Anyway, if you can stay, I will open up a few rooms. The challenge is, there you go. So I'm going to create the rooms now. Feel free. Yeah, feel free to just join one that you wish.